Thank you for joining us once again in the South Pole, the coldest room in the conference. And I'm super pleased to welcome Gabriel to give the next talk.
Hello, hello, welcome, welcome, good afternoon. You made it to the end of JupyterCon. Give yourself a little stretch if it feels good. This, by the way, this whole thing here is proof that you can't trust cliches like they save the best for last. But actually, this isn't quite the last part of JupyterCon. After this, there are lightning talks and there are sprints this weekend, but I think that's it. So we're going to get started in just a bit. I'm going to give maybe 1 more minute for people to trickle in if they want to. The title of this talk is What? JupyterLab as a lab for web app automated accessibility testing. What does that even mean? I'll explain later. Today is Friday, May 12th. Gorgeous weather in Paris. We're scheduled from 3:30 to 4 in Louis Armand 2. If it helps you to follow along, you can load my presentation in your browser at hackmd.io/@gabalafou, GABALAFOU/what, WAAAT, that's what with 3 A's. And that link will show you all of the content in one page, including my speaker notes. If you prefer to see the content in slide mode, just like it's shown here, there's a link to the slide mode in the notes of the document view. And with that, let's get started. But before we get started, you should know that I'm not going to be doing an intro to accessibility. So if you're not familiar with accessibility, there will probably be some parts of the presentation that might not make sense, but hopefully most of it should be understandable. So here's a slide of our outline today. First, I'm going to tell a story and walk you through one accessibility issue that I worked on. My hope is that by using a specific issue, it will help to make things concrete that might otherwise be a little bit abstract. After that, I'll do a little wrap-up and then hopefully some time for questions. Oh, and there will be floofs along the way. A floof, in case you don't know, is just a cute word for pet. And on this slide, we have one of my coworkers' floofs. She's a black and white cat, and in this photo, she's sitting with a very serious face on the purple roofline of what I imagine is some kind of pet house. Stephanie assures me that Francesca always has a very serious face. But first, who am I? My name is Gabriel Fouasnon. I work at Quansight Labs. My background is as a front-end engineer, and my focus these days is in accessibility. One fun fact about me, I once had a 15-minute conversation with Marvin Minsky, sometimes called the father of artificial intelligence. We talked about long division, and I didn't realize until weeks later who I'd been talking with. Okay, we have another floof. This is Moose. No, he's not a moose. He's just a golden doodle who's sometimes a little bit confused about his identity, which, I can relate. So now I'm going to tell you a story about solving an accessibility issue in JupyterLab. But first, a little backstory. So working in open source is interesting. When I joined the folks working on accessibility in JupyterLab, I quickly learned about an issue on GitHub, number 9399. It was posted in 2020 by the user Man from Jupiter. I asked a coworker more about this issue, and they said they actually don't know who Man from Jupiter is. So I guess that's a bit like the man in the Iron Mask, which I felt obliged to make that reference since we are in France. Number 9399 is a bit infamous, not just for the air of mystery, but also because it's a massive, extensive accessibility audit of JupyterLab. And I would like to draw your attention on this slide to just one small part of 9399, just one accessibility issue out of many reported in that audit. In this one area, Man from Jupiter points out that the JupyterLab version 2.2.6 was not following the Web Content Accessibility Guideline number 2.4.7, which is about making focus visible. What is focus visible? So focus visible, without getting too technical about it, is about putting a visual indicator around whichever part of the web page the user is interacting with. The typical example for this, if you're a sighted user, you're on a web form and you move from one form field to another and you see an outline appear around the form field that you just entered. And you press the tab key to move around, and then you see which one has focus. So on the left, the first name field has focus, and on the right, the last name field has focus. But focus is not just for form fields. If you rely on the keyboard and you press the tab key to move around pages, then you also want focus indicators around links and buttons and so forth. In terms of accessibility, having a visible focus indicator is an important feature for anyone who relies on keyboards to operate a page. It's also important for folks with attention limits. So how does this show up in JupyterLab? Here we have a screenshot of the first screen of the JupyterLab UI with the file browser and the launcher tab open. Which part of the UI has focus right now? You might want to guess the file button, the new file button, this one here in the top left. Let me see if the spotlight feature works. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Oh, sad face. Oh well. But you would be wrong. It's actually just impossible to look at this screenshot and see which element has focus. And that's the whole problem. Digging into this, it was pretty easy to find the culprit. There was a rule in the CSS that I put up here on the slide. It says, for any element on the page that has focus, unset the outline, which is also known as a focus ring. So this just turns off the default browser focus indicator, which is bad for accessibility. Please don't do this. Some elements in JupyterLab created their own focus indicators using things like element borders, so they were unaffected by this rule. But for everything else, this created an accessibility issue. So the fix was pretty easy. I just had to remove the CSS and then fix a few things that got broken, and here's the result. Now you know which element had focus in the previous JupyterLab screenshot. It was the first file in the file browser. So why is this important? There are lots of reasons, but let's just take one. Imagine you have a disability that makes it hard for you to use a mouse, but you can use a keyboard. If you rely on the keyboard, you probably heavily rely on keyboard shortcuts, so you want to know if you press a keyboard shortcut, for example, to delete a file or rename a file, you want to know which file will be affected by that keyboard shortcut. And if you can see which file has focus, if you can't see, then that's going to be difficult. Okay, it's floof time again. This is Maysoon Zayed with her late cat, Beyonce. Maysoon is an actress, comedian, writer, and disability advocate. She had the #1 TED Talk of 2014 titled, "I Got 99 Problems, Palsy is Just One." By the way, it's really funny. I recommend it. This photo, by the way, is from the Disability Visibility Project, which you can visit by going to disabilityvisibilityproject.com. You can find links to all of these in the presentation document, by the way. Okay, we fixed the accessibility bug. Yay, we made the world a better place. Frodo, can we go back to the Shire now? Well, so this is where I would like to talk about the security analogy. By which I mean, a lot of times in the web accessibility space, an analogy is made to security. They're both cross-cutting concerns. They're both kind of asymptotic in the sense that you can never really say your app is 100% secure. Similarly, you can't really ever say your app is 100% accessible. Such statements don't really mean anything. If this were a security bug, you probably wouldn't call the job done until you'd written a test to make sure that the bug doesn't reoccur. Because that would be embarrassing if somebody reported a security bug and then it just popped back up sometime down the road after you'd already declared it fixed. It's the same with accessibility. Once you fix it, don't you want to make sure it stays fixed? So if you ask DuckDuckGo or some other more popular but less privacy-protecting search engines about accessibility testing, there are a number of different things out there that you will probably find. But 3 of the most popular accessibility checkers that you will certainly land on are Pally, Lighthouse, and Axe Core. But in reality, both Pally and Lighthouse are built on Axe Core. So it's really just Axe Core. Pally actually supports one other engine called HTML Code Sniffer, but my point is that if you do a web search, it will look like there are lots of different checkers to choose from, but there's really only a few, and the space is really dominated by just this one. So what happens if you run these checkers against JupyterLab? In this screenshot, you have JupyterLab on the left and Lighthouse on the right. Specifically, you have a Lighthouse accessibility report on the JupyterLab UI that you see on the left. And guess what? There are a few issues it identifies, but none of them are about WCAG 2.4.7 focus visible. I bring this up because I think it's really important for developers to understand that these checkers, to understand what they say when they say they've scanned your website or your app and found no accessibility issues. It's a little bit like using a spell checker. Just because you use a spell checker doesn't mean that your paper is free of writing errors. But I think that's also where these tools create confusion, because if you run a spell checker against a document and you get no errors, then you probably don't have, you probably don't have any spelling errors. You might have some malapropisms or something like that, but you can be fairly confident that every word in your document is actually in a dictionary. But if you run an accessibility checker against your website or app, it does not mean that your site is free of accessibility bugs. And at this point, I should mention that I'm really indebted to my thinking on this to a developer named Manuel Matuzovic. I saw a talk of his in which he went on he went wild on his site and made it diabolically inaccessible, down to the source code. This slide shows on the left the highly accessible website that he started with, and on the right, and no, this isn't a bug in my slide, he actually made the site invisible, but still got a perfect score on Lighthouse. Okay, so where does that leave us? For this particular accessibility bug about a missing focus indicator, we can't use the off-the-shelf checkers. They don't catch the bug. Maybe we could write a manual test script, but what would that look like? So if I imagine myself, I would load JupyterLab in the browser, I would press the tab key, and each time I press the tab key, I would check the screen for changes. If at any moment there's no focus indicator, then the test fails. If only we had a tool that lets us write a test like that. This is an image I took from the Wikipedia page for Deus Ex Machina. It's from Euripides' play Medea. It's the part near the end where she goes off on a golden chariot that the sun god gave. It's a Deus Ex Machina because we've reached that point in our story. Turns out there is a tool that does exactly what we want. It's called Playwright. It's free and open source tool from Microsoft. And again, all the links are in my slides. So what does Playwright do? Well, it acts as a kind of go-between. You can imagine your test code on one side, Playwright in the middle, and on the other side a browser engine such as WebKit, which is the engine behind Safari, or Gecko, the engine behind Firefox, or Chromium behind Chrome, and just about every other browser on the market right now. Your test code can tell Playwright to interact with the page in ways that are closer to how a user would interact with the page. So that means you can ask Playwright to click buttons or links, to fill out form fields, to take screenshots, to navigate backwards or forwards, and so on. I think probably the easiest way to contrast Playwright with an accessibility checker like Axe Core is to look at what each of them take as input. Axe Core takes a web page. It's almost like a Xerox. You give it one page at a time, it scans the page, and it tells you what you found. Playwright, on the other hand, it takes input it takes a test script as input. Like find this button, click it, go to this page, check a value at the bottom, etc. And here's an example of a test script. Don't worry, I'm going to explain this code. This is basically the code version of the manual test script that I described earlier. Let's break it down. On the first line, we call a function called test. We pass it the name of the test as the first argument, should have visible focus indicator. And we pass the test function as the second argument. On line 2, Playwright passes a variable called page to our test function, which allows us to manipulate and interact with the web page that Playwright has opened for our test. Remember, Playwright is a go-between. The body of the test function is a loop that, well, loops over all of the tab focusable elements on the page. Let's take a look at what that does. On lines 5 and 6, we call a function page.evaluate. This is key functionality in Playwright, and one that tripped me up a little bit at the beginning. We pass a function to page.evaluate. This function returns document.activeElement, which is basically whatever element in the browser currently has focus. But here's the thing. What you need to understand is that Playwright takes this function that you pass to page.evaluate it, and it actually runs the function in the browser's execution environment and waits for the return value, and then relays that return value from the browser back into your test code. So that's how lines 5 and 6 get the currently focused element, and we store a reference to that browser element in a variable called node. Next, we take a screenshot of the currently focused element by calling node.screenshot, which is another very useful functionality that Playwright provides. It allows you to actually take screenshots of the page, and yes, these are just normal screenshots like you would take. On line 8, we ask Playwright to press the tab key by passing the word tab to the page.keyboard.press method, and then on the next line, we take a screenshot of the node while it doesn't have focus. And in the 3 lines 10 through 12, we compare the screenshots, and this is just a simple pixel-by-pixel comparison. If all of the pixels are equal, then we know the test has failed, because if there had been a visible focus indicator, then the 2 screenshots should be different. And of course, that didn't work. The problem, as I discovered after debugging, was that when you call node.screenshot, Playwright takes a screenshot of what's called the bounding box, and unfortunately, the bounding box does not include the focus ring, which is what this image shows. This is a screenshot from a section of a Playwright test report onto which I attached the node screenshots. Sorry, maybe this could be a little confusing because I'm showing you a screenshot I took of screenshots that Playwright took. And what this image shows is that both screenshots are identical, and so the test failed. By the way, these are not blurry like that. They're just small PNG files that when blown up on the slide, they look fuzzy. Okay, so how do we fix the code? Well, we go to the docs. And we discover that Playwright has all this extra functionality that we can take advantage of, including this ability not to just take a screenshot of the node, but of the entire page, and to specify where on the page you want to take that screenshot. So if we do that, yes. On this slide, the 2 screenshots are different. The focus state did indeed have a focus indicator, and the unfocused state did not. Okay, so now how does our test work? Well, if computers didn't suck and the world weren't a giant dumpster fire, maybe, but of course I did find some more issues. But this was actually good and like really good because I found more things that I might not have actually caught on my own, like some very subtle like focus issues. There's also just other work I'd have to do to tweak it and make sure that it like always works and stuff like that. Okay, so we've written the test. We opened one pull request to fix the menu bar and another to fix the skip link. Now what? It's documentation time. So why documentation? I can think of a few good reasons. One, I'm wondering, probably many of you have caught an error and then it had a link and you clicked on it and it takes you to a web page and you see, okay, a lot more description. So that's one. It's also like this field is kind of still niche, and there's like going back to that analogy to security, some people just don't know a lot of stuff. So like we need to, it can act as a tool of education and also just to find more information. So anyway, if I were to write a doc for this, I would make sure to link the PRs that fix the accessibility issue, and there's more than one at this point. Link to the issues that are involved. Specify the accessibility guidelines and link to those. And also just talk about the limitations of the test. And And this is a draft PR I submitted. I was hoping to submit the final PR, but I didn't want to submit it without writing the docs. And we have one more floof here. This is an image of Hannah Sawyer and her cat, whose name I don't know. Hannah Sawyer is a queer disabled writer interested in perceptions and representations of othered bodies. She is the founder of This Body is Worthy, a project designed to celebrate bodies outside of societal ideals. And once again, I got this photo from the Disability Visibility Project, so check them out. And I think that's all I have time for today.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah?
Hey, great talk. I really enjoyed it. I was wondering, one of the focus highlighting issues is if there's low contrast or if the focus is like very subtle. I'm wondering if the way you were writing the test, would that pick up on that? Or like how would you try to solve that, like write a test for something contrast related?
Right. That's why I want to put limitations in the document for the test, because exactly. This test that I have right here, this is like V1. And it will tell you if there is a focus indicator, but it's not going to tell you if it's a good focus indicator. And so this is actually, I think, maybe a direction in which things are going, because there's a group called ACT. I can't remember. I think it's called, or ATC. I forget. So many acronyms. But I think that my impression, I'm not actually in the W3C, but my impression from sort of like snooping in from afar is that they are moving towards a direction of trying to make these guidelines more rigorous in their like testability and that kind of thing. So yeah, future versions, future work. Oh, one more thing on the focus visibility. The new WCAG guideline actually has new guidelines for focus indicators that actually take into account this question that you have of it being, a good focus indicator or not.
So sometimes guidelines are really nice because they're so clear about exactly what should happen that you don't have to make any judgment calls or decisions. You just implement what they say. But in the case of things where like you have to pick a color for your outline, or you have to pick a width, or you have to make some design decisions to finish implementing, do you have any advice for how to make those decisions?
There were I had some slides about exactly that, but time. Not exactly color stuff, but it's more abstractly. These guys, this is something we've run into, actually. And part of what, I didn't get a chance to do it, but I wanted to explain my title, JupyterLab as a lab, because what we've discovered is that with CAG, yes, it seems so nice, like everything is all like specified out, but then it's actually more geared towards static websites. And JupyterLab is this like really complex internet web application, and so a lot of times you find yourself in these gray areas. Sometimes even what's worse is you follow the guideline and then you realize, wait, this might actually be a less good experience. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but that has definitely happened. And you're like, oh, I don't know what to do now. Gosh, I wish I had a good, what do you do in that situation? Here's what I do, just honestly. I talk to people, and be like, well, okay, and just spitball ideas until, and if you have someone who's disabled or who this will definitely affect, ask them. That's going to, if you have that access, that's great. I don't know. Those are the tips those are all I can think of on the spot.
Does JupyterMan know that this is addressed? Does JupyterMan know that you've addressed the issue?
Man from Jupiter?
Man from Jupiter? Sorry.
I have not gotten any contact from Man from Jupiter yet. Stay tuned.
And are you still mostly working on focus, or are you working on other accessibility issues as well in your lab?
We are working on other accessibility issues. My brain headspace right now is in focus land. But I've also, another thing that was quite gnarly was that I have a PR up for is removing tab traps from the notebook editor. I feel like that one I finally took it out of draft mode. I feel like it's going to be a long journey though before it gets merged in.
What are tab traps?
Tab traps. Well, okay, so I'm not sure if this is a word that's used. It's also known as keyboard traps or focus traps. It's when you rely on a keyboard and you press the tab key to navigate through the page, and then it lands in some part of the page that doesn't want to let go of it, and you can't press the tab key again to go to another part of the page, and then you're stuck there, unless you're familiar with kinds of tooling that can get you out of it, which not everyone is.
Who here has a floof at home? There you go. Thank you so much. Round of applause, please.